One.
Hello and welcome to the Ladies Tale podcast.
Yes, we are definitely doing the Ladies Tale podcast. I was gonna
Well,
say
we didn't even discuss it. I just got it right. I just was like, I'm doing the Ladies Tale podcast.
Honestly, I was gonna be like the Women's Cave, and then you said the Ladies Tale podcast. I was like, no, our guest today deserves the Ladies Tale podcast.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, everyone deserves
the Ladies Tale podcast, but yeah, I don't know, for extra reasons. I was just,
because people
awesome.
listen to our the Women's Cave too. Like they still love it, and that was like the flagship show that we had though.
Yeah,
I'm Jade,
and I'm Winona. Oh,
high five, social distance, y'all. I mean, COVID's still out there. Don't touch people's hands, y'all.
Not yet.
We're getting there, but not yet.
Why am I signing soon?
I don't know. Like, what are we doing today? Like, okay, it's Monday.
So this whole show will be an American Sign.
No, we're
I am so lying to you.
We're joking right now. I was like, wait, don't say that. Now I have to cut on. No, you're joking. And I had to cut on like my American Sign Language. I was like, wait, I just cut it off.
Yeah.
Stop it. Stop messing me up with my languages.
Let's move on.
Yeah, so we wrote literary life guides with pop poetry. Yes, y'all, we actually do have some wise things to say every once in a while. Mm-hmm. I said every once in a while.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, and I thought divorce was bad with other life lessons, and I thought being grown up was easy. Only I would meet a memoir in verse. What else was it? Widow's Web.
For me, there's Widow's Web and Foreign Coffee.
Yes, absolutely. You can check out all of those on wherever you get your audio books.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So we're just doing that for the summer, y'all, because who wants to love all those books to the beach? Nobody wants to do it. But if you do want to lug all those books to the beach, please go to www.andithoughladies.com and check out all the books we have and all the wonderful things that we have going on. There's like 17. Well, no, what are you doing today? Okay, we have a co-host.
Hello, ladies. You guys are on fire today, huh?
Or not, depending.
I am Tanya Todd. I'm an author, actress, and the host of the 52 Love podcast.
Thank you so much.
She's
all right.
So good at it now.
And she just gets so precise. Perfect. One day when I grow up, we're going to do that.
No, we won't.
When I am 5'2", y'all, I'm telling you, it's going to be amazing the things I can do. When I'm 5'2". All right. Y'all aren't here to hear us go on and on about whatever, or me growing some inches. You're here to hear from our wonderful guest. Wonderful guest.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Robin Moxkey, Stockbridge, Mohican, Muncie, and I work in creative tech focused on Indigenous groups.
Wow. Creative tech? What is creative tech?
I was about to ask the same thing.
I don't really know. No, I'm just kidding. It's the area of tech where you're not just programming or coding, you're coming up with other applications of how you can utilize this tech in other ways. And I think we can get into this later, but I think when you're talking about marginalized communities and you're talking about hacking and specifically using things for other purposes to solve problems, that's what these communities do on a daily basis. So, and that's kind of the concept behind hacking to begin with. And they kind of go hand in hand. You're taking something and you're solving a problem with it.
Okay.
I remember being in school and they always, when you learn a coding language, like this is a language. And once you really learn it, you'll be able to manipulate it and use it for other things. And now when you said that, I was like, oh, that's what they meant. Once you learn it, you can actually use technology and write programs that can do other things for people. That's cool.
Well,
okay, that is my entire adding on to that. I had no question whatsoever.
You had no question. You just said a bunch of statements together. Oh my goodness.
How did you get started in creative technology, or especially using it for marginalized people?
Well, I'm from a reservation community, and I didn't have a computer growing up. I would use the one at the public library. And I think, and this is what people I think misunderstand, because I would have been really intimidated if I was introduced to coding and the concept of like, here's this foreign language, build something with it. So it wasn't like that. I just wanted my MySpace to be sparkly. And so I learned some HTML so it could have like a nice background. And that's what people need to start understanding is like, and I think people do understand this, but we're constantly told, unless you're doing something grand with it, it's not worthwhile. You shouldn't congratulate yourself for it. But what you just did was you taught yourself a skill. And so, and I think because I had limited resources and I couldn't afford a web developer. And so you start learning other languages because you're like, oh, I learned HTML for this. Now I want to make stuff move, but you learn JavaScript. And like, I would just Google and learn that way. And I think this was sort of the building blocks, but I didn't know anyone in my community that worked in tech. It never seemed like, because when I think of technologists, I would think about what I saw on TV. And so it's like very much this like very white, very male, very just not something relative to me. Like there wasn't, even college wasn't something that I ever considered. And when I did finally go to college, which was later than like, I had already spent a few years out of it. And then I remember like when I went to school, I was just like, I'm gonna get this degree and then change the world. You know, like there was this like very nebulous idea of what I would do with the degree. And it wasn't until I had a mentor who was just like, and I had coded something to get out of doing work. I created a crawler just to aggregate data for me so I wouldn't have to manually do it. And she was just like, why aren't you in tech? And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, I didn't think this is literally something everyone could do if they have access to computer time. And we make it seem like it's that only few are able to do it. I prove that it's not. It's more, it's just like having these resources at your hands. And then that just sort of built, because once I was able to like, the cool thing about when you start getting access to things, whether it's like having a mentorship, it's where you take it. So same thing with a diploma. It's not actually like what your GPA is, it's what you do with it. And I had these amazing opportunities along the way, like had this mentorship and had this like some other internships, and they taught me things. So I go back to my community and just, we'd have these grassroots workshops. And I remember like, okay, I want to do like a hackathon. How do people host these big hackathons? Because I would go to them and I would be oftentimes the only woman there. And I was only going to them because they would give like a $500 travel stipend. So I would take Greyhound or Bolt bus, and then I would keep the rest of it. And this is partly how like I would pay for certain things, because there were no jobs out there that I could like, jobs are really coveted on a reservation system. So you will have like, you can have people with PhDs working at your local like gas station, because there isn't, we're talking about the largest food deserts in the US exist on reservations, the Navajo Nation, Lakota, like these are swatches of land that aren't often represented. We don't have the same access to resources. So once I started getting this platform, and I remember like I had this hackathon and I shopped it around for a while. And the thing you have to get used to is rejection. Because I even had companies that now work with me, but tell me to my face, they just didn't understand why the focus was on Indigenous people. And they're just like, well, if you add other people to this group, then maybe we can support it. We just don't think there's an audience within Indian country. And it's to tell somebody who's part of that community that they don't see utility in it is super frustrating. But then I kept taking it around, and I ended up on this weird PBS series for a while, but that gave me a platform. And that was the thing where suddenly companies were just like, oh yeah, you know, you can do this, but you have to direct it. Like, and so that, you know, it's scary, but just, and I think this is like just a larger thing when you get those opportunities, run with them, because you never know what's going to happen. You're not going to ruin it. Because I think one of the fears that I had for a while was I don't want to ruin it for other natives. I don't want people to, because if you're coming from a marginalized, underrepresented community, people have a tendency to think that this one person represents everybody and can speak for
They sure do.
Yeah, and it's like, I cannot speak for any other native. I cannot speak for anyone in my tribe. I can only speak for myself and my experiences as a Native woman, as an Indigenous woman. Like, this is what I know, but this doesn't matter outside of the rest. I am the lone representative. You become the lone professor. You become the historian. You become everything to people who've never met a Native. But at the same time, I was so hungry for like these opportunities. It was like, oh, and I did luck out in having like really great people who were running these events were sort of like, if I did mess up, like there were certain things that I didn't always expect when these like hackathons started, where it was like, we'd put on an event and I wasn't expecting anyone to show up. So when we would get like PhD students from Rutgers, and then we would also get high school students who wanted to let me know very specifically that they were forced to be there and have never coded a day in their life. Like, and you have to like, you're doing this event for 8 hours. Those were things where it's like, oh, like actually I have to start thinking about like accessibility and how to keep everyone engaged and part of this and inclusive, and create and making sure that I'm not contributing to people feeling alienated. And that's watching the words that I use, meaning like hackathon itself. That was something I think growing up that I would get frustrated with, because people would use these acronyms all the time and they expect you to know what it was. Like even college, I was kind of put off by it before I ever went because I didn't understand how to go to school. And so when people would say stuff like, just fill out FAFSA, you'll get money, that doesn't mean anything to me. Like I can Google it, but I don't understand, what do you mean you can get money to go to school? Like, what does that mean? And same thing with like tech, there were like, people would use all these things, but it's like, when you're self-taught, you don't often know these like proper terms. And there's two schools of thought: people who want to uphold what the proper thing to do is, rather than like just doing the thing. And it becomes this like greater sense of like, oh, okay, like, you know what, I'm just gonna ask as many questions. I don't really care if people don't think I know this, because I'm not gonna feel bad. It's not an innate thing to be born knowing what FAFSA is, or knowing how to code, or what different languages are, like Python. Like these are not, we shouldn't be ashamed that we don't know them. And then also like, some of this isn't in my community and there's nothing wrong with that, but that needs to be changed. And that these other companies need to understand that, because oftentimes I'll be the first native somebody has met. And so sometimes they're just like, oh, you code, and they're so surprised, and you realize they're not surprised at you, they're surprised because it's like, why are you doing this thing? And it's like, you want them to sit on that a little bit and to decode why they're so surprised. Are you surprised because you knew there wasn't access in my community, and you're just like, or there wasn't access for people like me? And then that's for you to figure it out and figure out why you're uncomfortable and why you're questioning that. And I think, I don't know, I think it's leveraging the platform that I kind of had to do these things, because you never want to be the only person, the only native in the room, is how I viewed it. Like, it's not a good thing. And other natives are not going to take away from you. In fact, they're going to make it so much easier, because I'm not having to be this like zoo animal, is often how I felt, where people would come in and look, and it became this very much like, this is Robin, she's native, and versus like, oh, like these are these cool things that we're building. And now the really cool thing is you're seeing a lot of people, and this goes into what creative tech is, oftentimes including people in things becomes it's not about talent beating people over the head and saying like, you have to learn Python to build this. When you go to a community and you want to teach a group of people how to code, you have to look at it like, actually, what can you do to serve this community? So when I go to a place, it's about meeting people where they're at. And it's like, what are you interested in building? And how can we facilitate that? So what interest do you have? Because that's the thing, everyone can be involved in tech. You may not know any code, but if you have a problem that you want to solve, one of the biggest things often we end up working on is MMIW, which stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. It's a huge movement within Indian country. And a lot of people want to build databases within their communities, because one of the reasons why this started was we're the largest group of people who are unaccounted for when women and children go missing. The government doesn't keep a database on us, so it falls on us to keep our own, because we're not counted as people. So this becomes—
Will you say the name of that again more slowly for the audio listeners?
So it's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, and you'll often see this as hashtag MMIW. You'll see it, oftentimes they would do the red hand over the mouth. It became co-opted by outside groups, but at the same time, this is something that it's very big in Indian country. It's something you can Google MMIW, and you'll see a lot of resources for it that discuss this really big epidemic, because I don't think people realize it wasn't until 2012 that we finally had some sort of recourse if a Native woman went missing or was murdered. Up until that point, because we're on federal land, it was this weird case of like, we couldn't hold the criminal, but outside courts didn't want to prosecute because it's federal land. So we would have to report it. And then people just didn't view it as important enough, because Native women and marginalized women often are sort of discounted and just not given the same importance that people from mainstream communities are given. And that's a problem. That's a really big problem. And it is upsetting that it falls on the community to solve these problems. But I also think, fine, if that's the thing, we can do that, and we can have it shouldn't be that way, but we can still keep talking about it. We can still keep building things. We can, again, you don't want that onus to fall on the community, because I want outside groups to be accountable for this. I want the state prosecutors who don't feel our cases are valid enough to be held accountable for this. But what is the small part that I can do to contribute? Even if it's, sometimes it's just understanding the issue. Like, I'll be in a community and I might even think I understand an issue, but it might be different than what the community has experienced. So it's like, okay, how can we combat it? Or what do you want to see from this? Or what? And that's, again, this is a larger concept of what tech actually is. A lot of people want to gatekeep that tech is just this very specific area of coding. But tech sometimes can just be building a database. So literally just collecting notes on something and making them in an organized way. You have access, like, it's a much more accessible field than I think is often presented to people. Sorry, that was a long rant, but
it was okay.
It's okay. It was very informative.
Tanya, I know you have questions.
I do. I have several, and a lot of them covered what you were referencing. So I want to shift gears a little bit to make sure we get more than one aspect of what you do.
Yes.
You have a passion for storytelling. Will you tell us about that?
I think everyone's sort of a story. Well, everyone is a storyteller. Like, you have a story to tell, and it becomes, and for me, it was the way that I would communicate things. Like, science was always something that I was interested in, but I didn't know, and this goes into how, like, I was interested in tech, but I didn't know the proper terms for stuff. But it's like articulating that and communicating that to somebody, that in itself is a story. And then how do I relate to this thing that I'm building or want to build or want to create? And then also, how do I engage people and articulate this in a way for people who have no background understanding of what a reservation is, or what tribes exist, or things like this? Like, how do you explain it in a way that can engage them? And that's where I think stories become so central to that, because everyone can relate to, we all share certain concepts, or we're all at least aware of certain concepts. And it's like, so how can I tell my story in a way that relates to people? And this goes back to, like, the earlier thing about communicating. It's all about, it doesn't have to be grammatically correct. It doesn't have to be told in a very specific structure. As long as you're getting it out and people understand you, that's, I think, the most important thing, as long as you're communicating effectively. Like, but yeah, that's, and storytelling is just sort of an outlet of ways that I can explain Native issues.
Well, we wanted to talk about storytelling, right? Because so all of us, right? And we were like, let's talk about storytelling. Let's say some more stuff about storytelling.
I do have one question before we move
Did you
on.
just raise your hand?
Yes.
Oh, we were like in the fifth
On your own show?
Excuse me, on my own show. Let me raise my hand. I have a question. Do you now, co-host? Do you?
I'm trying to be polite about it. Not narcissistic. I can't take away from Robin's message.
Yes.
I can't be narcissistic and be like, excuse me, my question time, please.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
So my question, I just wanted to know, can you explain why you were on PBS? And then that's the last superficial question you'll have to answer from me.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you repeat I missed the key word there.
Oh, why were you on PBS?
Why are you signing to Taylor? What is going on with this life?
Why were you on PBS? I'm so sorry.
They were doing a show about coding, and it just popped up. And I was at that point, it just seemed like a really cool, I hadn't really thought about it. And it was more just like, they were like, hey, do you want to travel over the summer, meet a bunch of people in tech, and build some stuff?
Yeah, that sounds like food and travel. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And it
automatic. Yes.
All the things that I wanted to do, and it's really cool. And it was with two other people, and we didn't know the full scope of it. And then also, like, just the access to things, like, I didn't fathom what, because I didn't really think about the long term of it, where it's like, oh, then you're putting yourself out there, and then people are going to see this, and then people can comment and things like that. It's just like, oh, cool. Yeah, I get the stipend. I get to travel. I get to talk about tech. I get to hear other people's stories in tech. And you
help create opportunities for other people, or you inspire them to think, hey, she did it. I can do it too.
Well, I didn't even think about that. I was more just thinking about me. But like, but yeah, that's how I got involved in that. They had reached out and they were just like, oh, we think, to be honest, I think they were just like Googling natives and I popped up and they're just like, here, this person. But the fact that they had natives on there, and then also they really listened to me, because initially when we were presented the people that we were going to interview, I was like, well, none of these are native. And they were just like, well, this person really likes natives. And they were, and it's like, well, that's nice. But it would be, maybe there's this person. And that's the other thing, is like, it shouldn't fall on us being like, anybody who's coming from an underrepresented group that doesn't get the same space that other people are allotted in society. It shouldn't fall on us to have to educate other people or have to bring them up to speed. But at the same time, sometimes that opportunity is there, and just take it. And I view this as, man, I have a whole list. When people want to say, I've never met a native who does this, it's like, no. I have lists of natives doing really cool things. And here, you can't use that as an excuse. I'm giving you 10 different directors that are native. I'm giving you 10 different programmers that are native. I'm giving you a whole list of artists that are native. And it's like, and that just creates a better, one, it helps me feel at ease, because I'm not so upset that I'm having to like say like, hey, I'm not the only one. And then two, it's like, I may get to meet some people that are my heroes. Like, but yeah, that's how I ended up on that show.
I love it. I feel like that matches the ladies so well. We would be like, oh, will there be snacks? Yeah. Well, then we're there.
Okay, so speaking of food, tell us about the world's biggest fry bread. What was that?
Oh wow, you guys did.
Yep. Tanya's
that was a community project, and we were, so it's like, how do you get a bunch of people to come to something? And usually like on the res, it's food. Food is the way to get people to show up for anything. And then it's also, but how do we raise attention about food sovereignty is a huge issue. Again, like when we're talking about food deserts, there's 13 grocery stores that serve the entire Navajo Nation. And the Navajo Nation, just to give you context, is larger than the state of Delaware. So imagine the entire state of Delaware with only 13 grocery stores. And when I say grocery stores, I mean some of them are gas stations, and we consider them grocery stores, just because it's, and I think it's like 2.5 hours for me to go off the reservation to get from where I was at, which was near Central, to get to like a Walmart or something, which often will most of the time build off a reservation, so they don't have to deal exactly with our jurisdiction. And yeah, so the fry bread thing was like, okay, how do we bring attention to this? We want to talk about it. Plus, we also just wanted to do it. Fry bread is such a thing within our community. It was like, to give you like background on what fry bread is, we consider it traditional food, but it's not actually traditional. When the government came on and decided to move us from our land and burn our crops and take our like livestock, burn our livestock, do all these things, they gave us rations. So they gave us some lard and they gave us flour. And again, we're not the only group in the US that had this happen to. And what we did was we made something delicious with it. We made something that we still eat, and it's something that you'll see in multiple tribes. And I should probably have said this in the beginning. There's 574 federally recognized tribes and Alaska villages in the US, and those are just the ones that are federally recognized. There's 172 reservations, and each one, like, we all have like distinct cultures, and we have languages and stories, and there can be some similarities between the two, but we're very much nations unto ourselves. And then we also have like, but fry bread is this sort of overall thing. You see this across First Nations in Canada. You see this, sometimes we'll call it Bannock, but yeah, it's just, it was like, let's try and build this. So it's 230 pounds. We got the local high school involved because they had a welding program, and they had this old water tank, because one of the big things was, how are we going to fry this? And they had this ingenious idea to cut the tank, and then we just had to pay to get this bottom part welded, and learned about steel gauges because of this. I learned we tried. It did not go off well. It ended up in the like front page of the Navajo Times with the headline was something like "The Sweet Taste of Failure," I think. There may have been a mini fire because maybe some of the welding fell off, and oil doesn't exactly go out when you throw water on it. It's kind of the worst thing to do. We probably should have been more prepared but it was great. And for what we were trying to do, we were able to build a garden out of this. We were able to get more attention to food sovereignty. And then we also inadvertently, we got a lot of people talking about what fry bread is and why, because a lot of people were against it because they're like, why are you promoting one of the worst foods for us to eat? And there's a lot of policing that goes in within our own community where it's like, Natives shouldn't be eating this. This is too greasy. This is contributing because we're the group with the highest rate of diabetes, the highest rate of obesity, the highest rate of this. And it's like, I understand that. That it was never meant to be political in that sense, but it was just like, look, this is something identifiable. This is something that like some of us are really proud about because we learned how to make fry bread from our parents, who learned it from their parents, and we weren't allowed to keep. They actively went after our cultures, denied us the right to speak our language, denied us this, denied us that. And this is something that we were able to keep. It's not wrong to have pride in those things. And I think having the conversation around how fry bread fits in our communities was a side effect that I thought was really interesting and not something planned.
Wow. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about this, what I'm about to say. I've never had it, but God, I would like to have some.
It sounds like it would be good. Like it sounds really good.
But don't worry about a conversation with me about fry bread. I'm from the African American community, and all we do is eat bad things.
That's not true. That is not true, y'all. True. She was just making a horrible joke.
A horrible joke.
Oh my goodness, we're gonna have so many comments on that.
We will.
Oh no.
Anyway,
you hurt my head sometimes.
I do want to try this fry bread.
I know.
Please. Can you send us a recipe?
Yes.
I feel bad. Like, can I swap is there any recipe you want from the African American culture that we can talk about later? Just let me know. We swap.
Swap it. I mean, come on, y'all. It's a pandemic. What are you doing?
People need to talk about and the conversation about US and Black and Indigenous people specifically and how the country was built on our graves and your backs is something super important that isn't talked about enough, in the way that the allyship between these two communities, and we've seen it in the Cherokee freedmen, but we've also seen anti-Blackness within the Native community pop up. And that's something else that needs to be addressed, because people conflate race, culture, and ethnicity with the same thing. You can be Black, you can be Indigenous, and you don't have to separate that part of yourself. And I think that often in Indian country, this is just a larger conversation of what does it mean to be Native. We're the only group that has to keep an active card. They call it the CDIB, and it's a certificate degree of Indian blood. It's a horrible system that the government imposed on us. And it's something that we uphold now because the government imposed it on us, and we shouldn't. It's a bad system. It's a system that was meant to divide us. But then that's how people start conflating being Native with just the number and just this concept of nativeness that we didn't create, that outsiders created for us. But yeah, that's a whole tangent on its own with blood quantum.
I'm loving all of this information.
Tanya, two more questions.
One more question.
One more.
Because we're over time. One more question.
Seriously.
Only one?
Sorry, Tanya.
Okay.
Two for two.
Okay. How about this? We'll make it a Winona question. So it'll be one question with a part A and B.
What is the Think Indian campaign, and how did you come to be involved with it? And then the part B is you're lauded by Dr. Jill Biden for your poetry. As an artist, how did that make you feel?
That was really cool. I didn't know I was a poet until she said it, and I was like, oh wow. And it's sort of like, I think sometimes like there is a sense of like, I had same thing with tech, where it's like I didn't see myself represented in it. I didn't see myself doing it in this grand way, but meanwhile you're still doing it. And so oftentimes you don't know you're already at the destination because you're too busy looking around. And that's how I felt with a lot of these things. And as far as the Jill Biden thing, as far as Think Indian, that's actually a crazy story because I'm actively working on it right now. And when I first got involved, they had reached out to me and they were just like, hey, would you like to be part of this campaign? And I had no clue what the company was. I had no clue what Think Indian was, but I thought it was really interesting because I thought the message was super empowering because Indian is a word that outsiders love to tell us is wrong to use. And they'll chastise us and they're like, you guys should not be using this term. It's Native American. I have been interrupted in the middle of speaking to groups and they'll tell me like, no, that's offensive. Use the term Native American.
Thank you for telling me what's offensive to me.
Yeah, exactly. And what I think people need to also understand is this is my space where I'm speaking. This does not mean that you can say this. This does not mean that this can be used. I'm also
Right.
trying to tell people what they can.
We have similar words, yes.
Yeah, it is one of those things where it's like people need to sometimes just listen and just also like when it comes to Indian, that word is still actively used against us. There's under Title 25 of the US Code, like there are over 14 different laws that have the active term Indian. Like when you go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we call it the BIA, that is still our over-governing body that oversees all the like tribes, which is partly why we call it like, as a joke, we call it bossing Indians around the BIA, like because they just, Indian is still a term heavily used against us. And by that, people trying to get us to stop using that, I think what they're trying to do is rewrite what has occurred. It's contributing further to this erasure. And it's like, no, I'm going to keep using Indian. It's probably going to make certain people uncomfortable. And if it makes you uncomfortable, you should probably unpack why it's making you uncomfortable that I'm using this instead of you just listening to me using this term. Like that's, so yeah, my involvement in Think Indian was more than just reaching out and that's kind of how a lot of these things, I didn't set out with a goal in that. I sort of had this broad goal that was actually related to blood quantum when I went to college that turned into other things. And then the Biden thing was just like, as an aside, it's one of those really cool, when you get, you know, you may not agree with somebody on, or they may not even be your heroes, but there is a sense of when you have someone with a large platform like that shining a light or just sort of giving you space, there is a sense of gratitude that I have for that, because it was like, oh wow, like people, I may get resentful sometimes because it's like, why do I have to wait for somebody else to give me space, especially non-Native people? Why am I constantly waiting for non-Native people to give me space? And yet at the same time, it's like, oh, wow, they did give me the space. And I don't know, I'm constantly
And thank you for acknowledging it. You just wish the world didn't work this way. It's not really the person who's to blame. You appreciate the person, but the way the world works sometimes, it's like, why does that need to happen for anybody else to care?
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So I think that's a great place to end, y'all. So where can we find out more about you? I mean, like besides Googling you, because that's what we did, but it was a more direct way to find out more about you.
I think right there, I'm not really doing anything. I mean, I have a Twitter, but I'm not, in general, I usually, unless I'm working on a very specific project that I want the public to see, but I usually don't want the public to see it until it comes out. So around Indigenous Peoples Day, we'll have some stuff up. And I'll definitely link it on my Twitter, which is RMAXKII. But yeah, I mean, I don't have an Instagram. I'm really boring for all of this kind of stuff. It's boring, but I can tell you about some other great websites. Again, I recommend people Google MMIW and just become aware of what's going on in that. Collegefund.org has some great information about access and education within Indigenous communities. It also has scholarship advice for not just Natives, but underrepresented groups in total. If people are interested in going to tribal colleges, you can go to AIHEC.org, and it will tell you about the 37 tribal colleges in the US. If I'm trying to think of some other, there's a lot of great resources out there for people more interested in learning. And there's also nativesinTech.org, which is, I don't have an affiliation with it, but they're doing great things. And then there's ACES, sorry, that's one of the biggest ones, AISES.org. And that's American Indian Science Education Group Society, sorry. But they have a lot of opportunities. And again, not just for Natives, but people interested in certain areas within the country. We also focus on region and community with these places, but yeah.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on.
You do have a website, correct?
Oh, I do.
I remember we found you on Google, but we went to your website.
Oh, yeah, I don't feel like there's any like good information on there though. It's just like I haven't updated in a while. But yeah, that's just my last name.com. So MAXKII.
Thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate it. Tanya, where can people find out more about you?
You can find out more about my filmmaking projects on IMDb by just searching for my name. I'm across social media at Ms. Tanya Todd. My website is www.mstanyatodd.com. And my podcast is the 50 to Love podcast on YouTube and Spotify.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Oh, you can find out everything your ladies are doing on www.andithoughtLadies.com. Just remember, y'all, that,
No,
just remember,
charities.
y'all. Yeah, I'm about to say it. Wait, I said, and then I was going back.
Okay, go for it.
Bottom of the page are the charities that we probably support. Maybe we can support them also. And just remember, y'all, wisdom is all around you if
you're open to finding it and accepting it. So peace and love, you guys, from Winona
and Jade. Bye bye. Oh, yeah. Thanks for listening.